This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is David Burkus. David is a best-selling author, host of an award-winning podcast called Radio Free Leader, and an associate professor of management at Oral Roberts University. His latest book, Under New Management, challenges the traditional and widely accepted principles of business management and proves they're outdated, outmoded, and don't apply and don't work, and he reveals what does. He's delivered keynotes to leaders of Fortune 500 companies and future leaders of the United States Naval Academy. David is a regular contributor to Harvard Business Review and Inc., and now we have him here on the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All righty. Now, as you know, we usually ask a couple of quirky questions of our guests to get to know them a little better before we get into the content. So my first quirky question for you is, what actor would you want to play you in a movie?
So this is a really easy one because for the last 6 years, people have pointed out to me how similar the B-list actor Rob Riggle and I are. Rob played the police officer in The Hangover. He was in the comedy movie Step Brothers. If you watched the Super Bowl in the U.S. last, a few days ago or whenever you're watching this, he sang a whole joke piece about cheering for low-ranked teams. And so he's this kind of B-list comedy actor that he and I look quite similar. And in fact, I have been in restaurants in the Kansas City area where he's from where people ask me if I am him. So that would be the easiest transition, right? Because we already kind of look like each other anyway. I'm kind of already his unknown stunt double. So he then should play me.
Okay, that's good. Now, I wonder if he gets the same question. Are you David Burkus, the famous author and podcast?
Well, maybe that's the goal, actually. Maybe that's the goal.
Very good, very good. All right, so tell us something surprising about yourself that most people don't know.
So what most people probably don't know, I've done a very good job burying it in Google. But before I had a podcast, before I wrote any books, and still to today, I've been very active in training in judo and in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Both are they're wrestling arts, but they're more martial arts. They're in that kind of traditional outfit. In fact, you can probably see behind me, I've got these two belts because we're in my house recording this and it's video. You can actually see them. That's what those are actually about. They're from doing those competitions. I still do it 2 to 3 times a week. I actually did this morning before this interview. And if you want to search deep enough, you'd have to get to page 30 of Google. You will find videos on YouTube of me losing matches in spectacular fashion. So I once competed in a tournament, and little did I know that I drew a guy who went on to be this sort of superstar, and so people are always searching him out. So there's this highly viewed match of me losing in 40 seconds. It's yeah, but I've done a pretty good job of when you search his name, you find it pretty quickly. When you search mine, you don't find it. So I've done a pretty good job there.
Oh, that's hilarious. So it takes a lot to bury it in Google. So
it takes a lot of podcast interviews and a lot of writing for Inc. But eventually it pays off.
All right, note to self: go look at. All right. Well, thank you for that. And now to transition a little closer to some of the content we'll talk about today. So when was the first time you really got how important leadership was to the lives of people?
So really the first time for me, it's weird. I started my podcast and blog and started writing years and years and years before they arrived. But when my kids were born, when my first son in particular, but really both of them were born, that's when you get a sense, I think, of responsibility that I think, everybody talks about this leadership thing as, oh, it's wonderful and you want to be a leader and I'll give you 21 amazing ways you can be a leader, blah, 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 blah. It really doesn't hit home until you also realize that along with the influence comes a responsibility that it's hard to realize until you suddenly are in charge of somebody else's life, right? So that was really the first time it kind of hit me. And they're actually who I kept in the forefront of my mind when I was writing under new management, because I'm writing about all these policies that are sort of the new way to work and the new way that in employees' best interest to work. And so that was my kind of mentality, is like, these are the types of companies and the types of policies I would want my kids working in. Hence, I'm going to start spreading the message now in the hopes that more of these companies adopt these policies so they have a better chance 20 years from now, when they actually hit the workforce, of finding those kind of companies. I guess 15 years from now. The clock is ticking.
That's fabulous. So how old's your oldest?
4. I mean, I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So this is a relatively new revelation, right? And the good news is I've got time. The bad news is I don't have that much time.
Well, that is the most interesting answer I've heard ever. And I had a colleague once who used to say, would you want your own kid working for a manager like you? And I think that really resonates with a lot of people. So.
Yeah. No, so now when I give talks on under new management, I kind of close with that idea of, we all know the stats from Google, right? Or not Google, excuse me, Gallup. The 2 out of 10 employees are actually engaged. Everyone else is disengaged or actively disengaged. And if you think about that, like, for some reason, we're complacent on that idea. But if you think about that in the case of your kids, right? They have a 20% chance of finding a job that they love. That's unacceptable. There isn't a parent in America that would be like, yeah, okay, whatever. But if it's unacceptable for me and my kids 15 years from now, then it's unacceptable now, because now somebody's kids are working, right? Hence the need to kind of get after it.
Yeah. So tell us a little about your background and how you kind of came into this world of leadership and management. So
I'm totally accidental, like probably a lot of them. So I was an undergrad in college. I was a writing major of all things. So I sort of knew, like, people say, did you ever know you would write a book or two? I'm like, yeah, I did. I just thought they'd be fiction. I approached it from that sort of mentality. And around junior or senior year of college, I started reading more literary nonfiction, which then led to kind of your Malcolm Gladwell and Chip and Dan Heath and Daniel Pink sort of genre, the social science genre, which was really it was just Gladwell at the time and a couple other books. There weren't a lot of these kind of that genre of books out. And that was when I kind of decided, like, no, that's what I want to do. I like to phrase it as my goal is to try and make good ideas more useful, like try and make it easier for people to apply good ideas, which is what a lot of these authors do. And so that of course leads to, when you're an undergrad English major, that of course leads to, like, well, I should probably learn a bit more about all of this stuff. So that led to graduate school in organizational psychology. And then, interestingly enough, I've been a professor for the last 6 years, which was really accidental, right? But just when you keep going in school, eventually they start offering you those gigs and you're like, oh, that's not a bad thing to do while you're also writing. But I mean, really, to me, the goal has always been to scale these ideas bigger than just my classroom. If we really want to change the world of work with evidence-based management, it's got to scale faster and it's got to scale wider. And so that is writing, that is speaking, that is running the podcast. And it all kind of stems from that idea. I'm trying to make it easier to apply good ideas.
Beautifully said. Okay, great. So let's start talking about some of those good ideas that you talk about and under new management. So I was fascinated by the story of Vignette Nair from
Vignette Nair,
yeah,
from
Technology. Yeah. So tell the group here about the customer conference that he held and made his big announcement about his organizational change.
Yeah. So Vignette Nair took a huge risk, and in a way that, like, after we talk about it in hindsight, you're like, oh, this makes perfect sense. But the way that you spin it, it's incredibly controversial. So Vignette had a couple of life-altering moments that led up to a decision that he realized that his company wasn't in the hardware business. They sold, big network systems, and they did sell the hardware and engage in that, but they were really a service-based business. And so they needed happy customers, but trying to have happy customers in and of itself is a worthless goal. He realized that if he was going to take care of that, he needed to take care of his people first. So he had basically called a customer conference and made a big announcement that from here on out, you all come second. We as an organizational structure are going to put the people that are in what he would call the value zone, the people that interact with those customers, they come first. They come first so that they can put you first as the customers, but don't come to us. Our whole job is going to be to make their life easier, to make it easier for them to serve you. But to do that, we have to make them our priority and trust that they'll make you our priority, which, again, like I said, when you talk it all out, makes perfect sense. When you are in the room at that moment and you're hearing the CEO of a company say that you're not a priority anymore, it's a little bit hard to swallow.
That blew my mind. I couldn't imagine sitting in that room and hearing that as a customer.
Right, and it's one thing to say it, like to your own employees, to say like,
right.
We're going to do this whole thing. It's a whole other thing to announce it to your clients that they come second.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that he did. Reverse accountability was one of the things. Would you mind talking about that and explaining?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite kind of mechanisms, because it's one thing to say, oh, we put employees first and think that just means we have good benefits programs or what have you. But what he means is literally that value zone I was talking about, which is any employee role that touches a customer. That's where all of the value in a service-based business is created. So any employee role that touches a customer, they're the ones that all of the management and support functions have to be accountable to. And that, again, you can say like, oh, we're going to invert the hierarchy or do whatever. That is all lip service until you actually mean it. What I love what they did is they built a ticketing system, kind of like if you've ever worked with a company as a customer and you go to support, right, or technical support, et cetera, and you fill out a ticket and there's always people on the phone with you asking if it's okay to close the ticket even though they haven't solved your problem. Like, we're all used to that idea, right? This was the same thing, but the interesting thing was it was employee owned, right? So the employee who was trying to work with a customer, they could start a ticket that says, I need this. Maybe it's budget, maybe it's an answer from finance, maybe it's management supervision, whatever it is. And it goes to the person, that ticket then goes to the person who can give that employee that thing. And only the employee can declare that the ticket is closed. In other words, I have an employee, I have a problem, I'm trying to solve a problem for a customer, I need these things, I need you to get them, and only I can determine when you've gotten them and close that ticket. And then management and support functions are held accountable to how quickly does it take them to close out these tickets? How satisfied are the employees in the value zone with how issues are being resolved? I mean, essentially, they basically turned management and other support functions into a customer service department for the employees to make sure that they were the ones who were being treated first so that they could put customers first.
Talk about your servant leadership, right?
Oh, absolutely, right. Exactly. And servant leadership is a great example of one of those places that we kind of pay lip service to servant leadership, but we still like our special demarcated parking spot, and we still like our executive elevator, right? And we still like having an assistant to read all our emails for us, but we love talking about servant leadership. No, this is servant leadership. I'm accountable to you.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, they also, if you could talk about their review process. And how because that seems to really play into just what you were just describing.
Yeah. And so in addition to being bonused and being measured on how you're closing out tickets, they opened up a 360-degree review process, but unlike anyone you've ever heard of. Like in a typical one, you have you're the employee, you're going to do 360 reviews to your manager, maybe, and then you pick the peers, and then you invite a couple subordinates, and they all say some stuff about you, and then you get to read that, right? This was similar idea, except that anybody who had touched your role in the last year, anybody you'd interact with as part of your job, they could opt in to writing a review for you. So it wasn't you go invite people at all different levels around you in the organization. It was people at all different levels choose whether or not they have something to say about you, right? And then so that's the only minimum qualification is, did you interact with that person? And then if you do submit a review, you also can read all of the other feedback. So you can't just hide and like take the negative feedback and go, okay, I'll deal with it. You as a manager basically have to say, not only will I deal with it, because you all know what it is, I have to tell you how I'm going to deal with it. So now I'm accountable to you to deal with it. And this did not go over well at first, but Vinette knew kind of what he had to do to get it to scale, which was he was the first one to do it. He said, I'm going to do this system. You can do it or not do it if you want. If you're in an executive role, you can do it or not do it if you want. But I'm the CEO and I'm going to do it. So what do you want to do? It's sort of like a Sophie's Choice, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to do it, but I'm doing it. What do you want to do?
Exactly. So, so talk about what a difference that this made in their organization.
So, I mean, it's kind of funny. We know these things. You know the end result, right? You know the increases in morale that are happening. You know the increases in profitability. They all sort of happen. I think one of the things that's important to note is when you make these changes and you put employees first, or you give employees voice, right? Yes, you do get those increases. It's a long, hard road, right? And so yes, we got all of those things. I can't just de-emphasize the initial kind of management resistance like we were just talking about. So that's sort of this first reaction is not every manager wants to take this idea. Some people really like the perks, right? Mm-hmm. But eventually you get past that and you get employees who really do feel empowered to then put customers first and feel supported when they're going to go out on a limb for a customer. And so you end up with more satisfied customers, increases in repeat business, and you end up growing the organization to HLC Tech is one of the largest technology services companies in the world now. Vinet Nayir himself is not the CEO anymore. Now he's spreading the gospel of employees first, customers second, kind of all over the world because it was a success.
So how hard has it been for them to maintain since he left that CEO role?
That's an interesting question. All sort of indications point to a lot of the systems are left in place. I mean, once you kind of build that ticketing system and make the cultural change, dismantling it does not happen easily. The interesting thing to me is that I think a lot of times without that senior leader kind of firebrand saying, I'm going to do this, you can do whatever you want, but I'm going to do this, you can end up having a few people who sort of opt out. So we see a little bit of that, but you can't, it's kind of one of those things that you really can't go back to the way things were, because if you do, you lose all of those employees.
Yeah. I just wondered what the rest of the story might have been. Yeah. So that kind of leads us to what you talk about next in the book, which is some Harvard research that has been done in this area about profitable service-based companies. Could you kind of go into what the findings were there?
Yeah, I find this fascinating because this is not a new idea. Like Vinet Nayir seems like this amazing, this radical new idea of employees first, customers second. It's not actually a new idea. It comes from decades ago, some research from a variety of different professors at Harvard Business School who were actually started out looking at predictors of profitability, right? So you have to think back to like the mid 80s. And everybody's chasing profitability. You want the stock price to go up, so you want to be more profitable. So we start thinking about, okay, what is that? And at that time, one of the big assumptions was that the biggest predictor of profitability was market share. There were consultants who were making tons of money with this idea that like, oh, you just need to price your product exorbitantly low, you'll gain a bunch of market share, and then the economies of scale on cost will bring you into profitability. But market share is what drives all of that because that'll do economies of scale. So they started researching that and found, no, that's not really the case, right? Interestingly enough, those same consultants in the 90s made a ton of money unpacking the damage that they had done, but that's a whole other monologue, totally different book. Well, what they found was that, okay, the number one predictor of profitability for an organization, particularly a service-based organization, was customer satisfaction. Now, that in and of itself, like, okay, that's a great realization, but it begs another question. What predicts customer satisfaction? So they started to construct this whole sort of chain of events. They call it the service profit chain. What in a service business leads to profitability? Well, it's customer satisfaction, but what leads to customer satisfaction? Well, that's employee satisfaction. And what leads to employee satisfaction? Organizational cultures that put employees first, right? So this is not a new idea. We've known it for decades. What's new is people are actually taking the advice, experiencing the profitability, and then sort of spreading the gospel of employees first, customers second.
So does this apply to non-service-based industries as well?
Yeah, one of the most interesting studies I found was that they looked at retail organizations. They looked at supermarkets, actually, which is, on some extent, both a long-term service-based business and a short-term one, right? Because we all have that, like that supermarket we go to every week. Right, but the majority, in some cases, of clients, maybe small towns accepted, the majority are sort of one-off and done. They're going to whichever one's closer, et cetera. So there's not a strong brand loyalty there. There is with some part of the population, but not with others. And they found that the service profit chain essentially held true, that employee satisfaction led to customer satisfaction, even if it was a one-off transaction, which led to greater profitability. I mean, to me, if anyone's ever grown up living near a Wegmans, it totally explains Wegmans, right? And the one that I write about in the book. But it's interesting to me, too, that this model came from service-based businesses. And it applies to retail as well, which really sort of speaks to I think in our current economy, pretty much everybody is in a service-based business, right? This is sort of tags onto Clay Christensen's idea of sort of jobs to be done theory. This idea that even when you're buying a product to do a service or for you, or to make a service easier to do. So even if you are in retail, we are all kind of in the service business.
So you mentioned Wegmans. Could you use them and maybe some others as some other examples of ways companies have put employees first?
And so Wegmans is a great example in terms of the level of investment that they put in their employees. So, and again, I don't just mean like perks like healthcare, although that's definitely there, but willing to take kind of a long-term view on employees. So they have, if you think about a supermarket, actually, I grew up working in a supermarket my whole, like in middle school, high school, and even college life, worked at kind of the same one, was not Wegmans. But I get it. You get a lot of people in there who are younger employees. They're there. It's their part-time job. Wegmans starts offering scholarships to these people and come back from school during the summer and work for us. And those people inevitably turn into executives in the larger organization because they've been taken care of and invested into. But even if you don't go that route, like let's say you're not going to go into any higher education, you just want to work in the dairy area. Well, they're going to send you on tours to see how cheese is made so you understand it better, right? They're going to invest in your knowledge of this stuff just so that you can serve a customer better. So whatever it is you choose to make your career out of, they will help invest in that because they know they make you better, you'll do a better job for the customer. And you see it in other organizations too, Union Square Hospitality Group. So several different restaurants in the New York area. They're the people that created Shake Shack, if you've ever had a Shake Shack, right? They are notorious for this idea. Danny Meyer is kind of always trying to figure out what's the best way to run a great business, not just for the wait staff, but also for the cooking staff, right? Including even, and I don't know where I stand on this issue yet, I need to go visit one of his restaurants maybe. Danny, if you're listening, I would love to visit one of your restaurants and see this. But including even kind of saying, you know what, we're going to do away with tipping because it's creating disproportionate wages between front of house and back of house. Cooks don't get to participate in tipping, so they're underpaid. Waiters and hostesses get to participate, et cetera. So it's always kind of looking out for those employees, and it creates an incredible environment for diners at all of his restaurants.
Very cool, very cool. And I'll take some of those invitations too.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to several of his restaurants since he started the no tipping policy. I don't think I've been to one. I've been to Shake Shack several times, but they're not really engaging in that policy. And actually, technically, they've been sort of spun off and are now publicly traded, but that's a whole other thing.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So we've talked about putting employees first, and I'd like to shift gears a bit now because one of your chapters is about the idea of fire your managers. So tell us about the research there and some of the examples from your book.
Yeah, it's the sort of employees first, and then there is no one else, right? Right. This really comes from the increasing trend in self-organizing teams and I don't want to say flat organizations. We see this about every 2 or 3 years. There's another branded way to self-run an organization. The current one is holacracy, right? I chose sort of deliberately not to comment on any one of those because it just seems like every 4 or 5 years there's another one, and I can't keep track of it all. But it stems from this idea of the work that most people in the front line are doing has changed, right? It used to be when Frederick Taylor invented management that you had the management class and you had the labor class. And management's job was to tell labor what to do, and labor's job was just to not think and just execute. And we've gotten to the point where most of us, especially in a knowledge work organization, we're doing work that requires high levels of thought, and in a lot of cases requires us to know more about the job we're doing than does our manager. Right, and especially in situations where a manager is supervising several different types of employees, sometimes it's easier to take the role of management and push it down to those employees. Now, by no means does this mean you can't have no management, nothing supervised, no budgets drawn up, et cetera. But a lot of the tasks that we assign to traditional managers actually function better when it's a team of people doing this. And we've seen this in there's famous examples like the Morningstar Tomato Company, which is literally they harvest and package tomatoes and tomato products, which is a pretty sort of industrial factory mindset if you're thinking about it. And yet self-managed teams works there. You have companies like Valve Software is one of my favorite examples because not only is sort of everybody on a team that's self-directed. You can self-select on or off teams. In fact, all the desks at Valve have wheels on them. So if you just choose to join another team, you can just unplug your computer, roll your desk over, and now I'm working on this team, right? So this idea of kind of allowing for a self-organization and a self-management in a lot of industries is working really well. I'm not entirely sure we'll get to the place where like every single job will be able to turn management over to teams. I do think between self-management and automation, we're probably going to get to the point where there are a lot less manager roles in every organization.
Well, and another example you used in the book was it Nike, I think, that had shirts, two nearly identical organizations in Mexico.
Yes. Yeah. So it wasn't. I mean, so it was two different factories working to make kind of the same product, to make shoes. One, traditional management tactics, traditional Frederick Taylorism, budgets, control, production quotas, all of that sort of stuff. The other turned over to self-management. And if you're watching this, you're probably already the type of person that knows where this story is going. The self-managed team kicked the other one's butt, right? And again, it's clear to say this is not no management. This is just no need for a manager role, pushing the tasks that management does down to those individual teams, who, by the way, know more about how to do the job than would the manager anyway.
So then that begs the question, if there's somebody listening that's in a more traditional organization where there is more traditional management, what can that individual leader do within their scope to take advantage of some of these benefits?
So you're saying you're the manager and you're wondering, okay, I obviously don't want to fire myself, right?
Right.
What can I do? I think a lot of managers and a lot of traditional organizations can still take active steps to involve employees in a lot of the decision-making process, right? And I'm talking about little stuff. Like so often budgets, for example, just flow top down. Here's your budget, figure out what to do with it, et cetera. Well, you can kind of create like a barrier and go, okay, let's have a conversation. I can't ask for any more money, but collectively we can kind of decide what are the priorities where do we want to put the budget money we have for this department, et cetera, right? Instead of what a lot of managers do is kind of go, well, it's top down, so I just need to figure out, maybe I'll just cut it up all fairly among people or whatever system they use to try and make it fair. Fair doesn't always equal, and bringing the whole team in can kind of point that out, right? So that's one thing. Anything that kind of involves the team in decision making, you ultimately may still have to be the one person in the room with senior management making the case. But if you know that you've got those people behind you, metaphorically, if you've got them behind you, in that sense, you can make a much stronger case. And it's probably a much better one, just quality of the idea because of how many brains you're involving.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. One of the ideas that was different that you talked about was at IDEO, and I guess it was you mentioned David Kelly, who was talking about they had the different leaders talking about the projects that they were going to work on, and then the employees requested which team that they wanted to work on.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little more about that?
Yeah, so this comes from David Kelly started, he didn't technically start IDEO. IDEO started from the merger of three different design firms. And there's this apocryphal saying that David Kelly, who became kind of the figurehead of the new company, was like, we started IDEO because we wanted a place where we get to work with all of our friends, right? Which is great and easy to do until you grow. And then it's a little bit harder, right? So they got to this point where they really felt like, okay, we are too large to have every individual feel connected. What are we going to do about this? And what they decided to do in the short term, was take kind of the five senior leaders in the organization and basically break the company up into 5 divisions, 5 studios, they called them. So almost we're one company, but now we're 5 different companies. And every leader came up, they threw an all hands meeting. Every leader came up and said, here's who I am. Here's the type of projects that I'm going to be taking on over the next 18 months to 2 years. Do you want to be a part of it? And in the end, everybody kind of voted for which studio they wanted to go and which type of work they wanted to do, who they wanted to be with, et cetera. And originally they kind of had them ranked like 1, 2, and 3 choices, but it ended up that everybody got to go to their first choice. And what's interesting is even today in IDEO, they're now, so that was when they were around 150. Now they're north of 600 employees with several offices throughout the globe. And it still feels like this connection where you can still self-select into others' projects just to be helpful. And the teams are still sort of rotated around per project. And that's really the core of the idea is A lot of times, a lot of organizations, we hire you into a role. You are a box in a chart. You only move up or out from that box, right? There's no lateral movement. It's seen as step downs are even seen as negative. And that's not really in most people's best interest. What I call writing the org chart in pencil, right? And we still need an org chart, but can we erase it and can we rewrite it at times depending on where employees are, what they want to work on, et cetera? It increases morale, but it also, there's a lot of research that supports the idea that it increases creativity and innovation because you're constantly getting fresh ideas on new teams.
Very cool. Very cool. You've got so many other topics that you talk about in under new management. So I really do encourage folks to get the book and remind me again of some of the things that you talk about beyond just what we've talked about here today.
Yeah. So we look at 13 different practices that are seem a little crazy, seem a little counterintuitive, but are backed up by a good amount of social science research. And it runs the gamut. It's everything from, eliminating email or putting limits on when you're sending emails to opening up and being more transparent about how pay and compensation work so people aren't feeling ripped off, to even what do you do when employees leave and how do you keep them engaged in the firm even if they go to work for a competitor, for example. And all of the kind of the theme throughout all of the policies really is that they are practices of elimination. They are situations where leaders felt like there was something standing in the way of their people's ability to do their best work, and so they eliminated it. They're not necessarily addition. A lot of times it's more about doing away with older bureaucratic policies and then stepping into kind of what's new, which is, in my opinion, is kind of the biggest lesson to take away from the book. Whether you go email or write the org chart in pencil, whatever you do as a leader, as an individual, even if you're just leading a team in kind of middle management, you can still ask yourself, what's standing in the way of my people's ability to do their best work, and how can I help mitigate or eliminate that?
Very cool. Now, as leaders listening to this are thinking about their future, these practices and thinking about your kids when they grow up, since that's part of your motivation, what are things that you want to give a hint to for folks about the future of leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the balance of power already tipped, or we could say it's tipping, to the point where we were talking about servant leadership earlier. We love to give lip service to it, but we don't actually mean kind of employees first. We are moving towards sort of a period of specialization, a period where individual employees who choose not to go into management ranks are often more knowledgeable and more qualified for that specific role than are the managers or than are the leaders. And your job changes at that point because your job becomes, we actually use this term in academia. Your job shifts from being a sage on a stage to being a guide by the side, right? And what we mean in academia is with the wealth of knowledge that is out there for free, our job becomes teaching people how to sail how to navigate it all, not necessarily being the content delivery anymore. I think the same thing is happening with management and with leadership, is that in an age of specialization, when people know more about how to do their tasks than does the manager, your job is not to tell them how to do their task or what budget to do it under or what their production quota should be. Your job is to come along the side and go, how can I help you do your best work? How can I support you? Budgets are not what you need to stay under, but what do you need to do your best work? Those kind of changes happen. That's where we're headed.
Nice. So in your work in this area, what have been one or two pleasant surprises that you've come across along the way?
Pleasant surprises. Now that's interesting. God, can I just tell you surprises?
Okay.
I mean, they're all sort of pleasant. Yeah, there's a chapter in the book on celebrating departures, on cultivating alumni networks, on staying in touch with former employees. And when I really dug into that, what I expected to find was, people leave a firm, they take a lot of the training and the knowledge and all that stuff from one firm, and they take it with them to the next one. And that's kind of the reason we sign non-competes and we do all of that sort of stuff. Well, the truth is, when you look at it, what they actually do is they build a bridge to that organization. And then the knowledge flow goes both ways, which I was not expecting to find, and is really quite cool, especially as people's level of commitment to organizations, the average length of tenure gets shorter. It's kind of a reassuring thought, right? So maybe that's a pleasant surprise. The other really big one is the salary transparency piece. I was not expecting to be as strong an advocate as I am now. I mean, the way that we wrote the book is we collected, I collected like 20, 25 different practices. And the ones that lined up with research and the ones that had really good examples, they made the cut. I expected the transparency one not to make the cut, right? Because it makes me uncomfortable thinking about it, right? Letting everybody know what everybody gets paid. But the truth is, when it happens, both at the case study level with companies, but also the research level, you see increases in morale, increases in a sense of fairness, decreases in actual discrimination and the perceptions of discrimination. So it's a huge, provided your pay system is actually fair, it's a huge benefit. I have to give that disclaimer from time to time. It's a huge benefit letting people know what it is, because maybe most companies aren't trying to take advantage of their employees. They're trying to do right by them. So showing them how you're trying to do that has a pretty strong benefit. Again, one I wasn't expecting to find. And yeah, I mean, a TEDx talk with 1.4 million views later, this is apparently the thing I'm being known for, which I was not planning on like 2 years ago. But I don't mind. It's a pretty good message to be spreading.
Well, and as somebody who started my management career in the military, where our salaries are set by Congress, there are no secrets about what people make. And when I went into the private sector, I'm like, what? It's a secret? What?
Yeah, it's funny. That's been one of the dominant responses. I get a lot of different emails, love mail and hate mail. And a lot of them are, this couldn't happen in my company. There'd be chaos, et cetera. And then I get a lot of people who work for a military or work for a school system, work for something in the public sector. And I'm like, I don't get what the big deal is. This has been the way it is for my whole time. And I always just want to write back to those people and be like, exactly. We're just trying to tell that to the rest of the world.
I love it. All right. Well, before we sign off, is there any question you wish I would have asked that I didn't have, or something else you'd like to add to the benefit of the folks listening?
Wow, you put me on the spot there. I don't know. I mean, the biggest thing I like to emphasize, and I kind of already hinted at it, is this idea that as a leader, as a manager, often, especially if you don't have the power to change the organization, your job is kind of to become a human shield, to figure out those things that are blocking your employees from doing their best work or dragging your employees down, and being a human shield to them to keep kind of the junk off of them so they can do their best work. And this is true. Every good manager you've ever had, when you think about it, yes, they were encouraging, yes, they were inspiring, but really they let you do your work that you wanted to do anyway. Right. And that's really kind of the core. That's not going to change. A lot of the books about a lot of things that are changing, that one's not going to change.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, David. It's been a pleasure, and keep up the great work. I'm a big fan of the podcast and the book, so keep up the great work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again so much for having me.
This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com, or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.